I want to talk to you about Sebi's response to the Hindenburg allegations. Let's first focus on how Sebi responded to the allegations raised earlier this month. Issued late on a Sunday night, you described the Sebi response as particularly disappointing.
It carries no credibility, Karan. It carries zero credibility.
Do you think a JPC would be the right response at this time?
I've seen too many JPCs, and I think that becomes a political circus. But some kind of short, quick investigation is required to restore the credibility of the capital market regulator.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. In a recent article for her magazine Moneylife, my guest has raised serious, if not disturbing, questions about the way Sebi has responded to the Hindenburg allegations, both those revealed this month as well as those that were revealed 18 months ago in January 2023. Joining me now to discuss her concerns and perhaps expand on them is the Managing Editor of Moneylife, Sucheta Dalal. Sucheta Dalal, I want to talk to you about Sebi's response to the Hindenburg allegations. Let's first focus on how Sebi responded to the allegations raised earlier this month. Issued late on a Sunday night, you described the Sebi response as particularly disappointing. You say, when allegations are made against the chairperson and the regulator itself, the appropriate response cannot be anonymous. It should have come from someone in a position to speak for the regulator, i.e., either the board of directors or the finance ministry. So could you start by explaining why would that have been a better and more appropriate response?
Because Sebi is the capital market regulator. We are the fifth largest exchange in the world. In fact, the third largest capital market, especially NSE, in terms of the number of derivatives contracts traded. We have a certain responsibility, not just in the country, but even internationally. This regulator is supposed to play such a crucial role when it comes to fundraising, capital formation, and what have you. The credibility of the regulator is at a different level. And when the regulator reports, first of all, the regulator has a board. Second, it reports to the finance ministry. So when there is the biggest credibility crisis to hit the regulator, surely the administrative ministry, which is the finance ministry, has to step forward and say, hey, we are looking into this. This is serious. It may be utter bunkum, but we will look, examine, and then respond. You can't just say, it's rubbish because it's Hindenburg and Hindenburg is a short seller, right? You are talking about a capital market regulator. I really don't care too much about whether it was Hindenburg or someone else making, with a certain amount of credibility. If they had these documents and if they had made similar allegations, you would have to examine them seriously, is my view.
So are you also saying that an anonymous response, one which doesn't have the name of the person issuing it attached to it, carries less credibility and weight, both internally in India and perhaps more importantly, externally abroad?
It carries no credibility, Karan. It carries zero credibility because you have to start. What would I have liked to see in that press release? I would have liked to see the press release saying that Hindenburg is a short seller. Yes, they don't like Hindenburg. The allegations may be all false, but they are serious because they affect the credibility of the regulator. We called an emergency board meeting today. This is what we discussed. We looked at documents submitted by the Sebi chairperson and her list of recusals. We have discussed this with the finance ministry, and now we are putting out an appropriate response. We are talking on Zoom. How difficult is it to call an emergency board meeting on Zoom?
Absolutely. In fact, you make that point very powerfully in the piece you wrote for your magazine Moneylife. You say that Sunday night response defended the chairperson without any semblance of inquiry. It claimed that she had recused herself in matters of potential conflicts of interest without specifying whether that applied to the Adani investigation. So in your eyes, This lack of specificity, does it make the response vague, imprecise, and inadequate?
Absolutely. Not only that, you remember the documents say that the last email sent by her was when she was a whole-time member, right? So we are not talking about her past as a private person. We are talking about things that have happened after she joined SEBI, and a whole-time member, I keep repeating, is almost on par with the chairperson. In the hierarchy, the chairperson is the first among equals, though in practice, it is a chairman-led organization. So both reasons make it imperative. The second point is that it's not, SEBI is only about 30 years old, okay? But it's not that there is no institutional history. There has been history when, even when there were allegations against an organization headed by a person appointed as SEBI chairperson, they ring-fenced him. So had she made these disclosures, it should have been taken more seriously even before Hindenburg. Suppose she had said that I have these investments in these nested entities, which are part of what we are investigating. They should have said, okay, let's create a ring fence. You stay out of it. The 3 whole-time members will look into the investigation. That didn't happen.
In fact, when you refer to the earlier instance, when a person who was chairperson of SEBI at the time had himself ring-fenced, you're talking about CP Bhave in the mid-2000s.
That's right.
And you're saying that that should have been a precedent for the way SEBI behaved now.
Absolutely. So even if there was an emergency meeting, it's not that they had to think afresh and decide what to do. It was not like an issue where you're deciding on a silver medal for Vinesh Phogat. It's not a first time ever. You have a history. It's easy to do.
So one more question about the way SEBI behaved earlier this month. You said that the SEBI response, and I think I'm quoting you from memory correctly, lacked all credibility. In other words, this response, as far as the world is concerned, is as good as no response at all.
That's what I think. So they have a whole team of people defending it. But I think if you look at people who are independent and are watching it, and it's going to keep coming back to bite them, because SEBI has set such high standards. Madhabi Puri Buch herself has such high standards for judging other people. If a Facebook friend of yours indulges in insider trading or leaks something to you and you like something, it is her order that you will be held as an insider and you pay up for insider trading. If that is your standard for regulated entities, then surely as a market regulator and the chairperson of that body, we have to hold you at least to that standard. I'm not even talking about a higher standard, which it ought to be, but at least to that standard.
And that's what she's failed to do. In other words, she's failed to live up to the very standards she sets for other people.
That's what I think. And this is, frankly, I must tell you, Karan, that I was very happy that a private person, private sector person had become SEBI chairperson. And, here was the first woman. So I would have given her a lot of rope on a lot of issues. But this is simple financial hygiene and housekeeping. And that's why it is so disappointing that it couldn't have been properly done.
Let's at this point, Sucheta Dalal, broaden our canvas and talk about SEBI's handling of Hindenburg since January 2023. We now know that the chairperson Madhabi Puri Buch and her husband Dhaval had investments in the Global Dynamic Opportunities Fund, which was part of the Bermuda-Mauritius fund structure used by Vinod Adani, Gautam Adani's elder brother. Should this not have been clearly disclosed at the outset? The truth is, we don't know whether it was or not. Doesn't that doubt itself raise worrying questions?
I think so. I mean, so now you have a series of denials that have come. So I'm told that the Mauritius authorities also put out a paper saying it's not these funds, it's something else. But this is not something the SEBI chairperson has denied. So she has not denied anything to do with the investments per se. The argument is they were done as a private citizen, good enough. Whether the recusal was made until 2023 or not, also nobody really cares because it doesn't come into the picture. But the minute it went out to the Supreme Court and an expert committee, and she made the presentations to the expert committee, I think the disclosure at that time had to be public, because some have argued that, well, all disclosures don't have to be told to all of you. Who are you to know it? Yes, we don't need to know. It may have been an internal disclosure. But once it went to the Supreme Court, Once it went to the expert committee and it was in the public domain, then I think a recusal or an offer for recusal. And if someone had said, hey, don't worry, you don't need to recuse, this is all in the past, then who was that someone who said that you don't have to recuse? All this should have been in the public domain.
Just to confirm that last point that you made, it appears, and I'm using that word deliberately and advisedly, it appears that this holding in the fund wasn't disclosed either to the Supreme Court or to the Supreme Court appointed committee. If that is the case, and most people believe it is the case, that is another serious lapse, isn't it?
I would think so. I think it should have been disclosed.
And this is a serious lapse of a nature that can't simply be a case of forgetfulness. Someone who's the chairperson of a regulator would know that disclosure is essential, particularly in tricky matters that pertain to you yourself. It's not something you can forget or accidentally overlook to do. It's done deliberately, presumably.
So let's go by what Sebi itself has said in that anonymous press release. They've said she has made recusals. Okay, we don't know what they are. We don't know what other recusals have been made, but apparently she knows the concept of recusal and she has recused herself, which is why I made the point that did she disclose even internally about Adani? If she did someone tell her, which the someone would only be her board or the finance ministry, did one of the two tell her, oh, it doesn't matter, this happened in the past, so you can continue the investigation and lead the investigation? So my issue is about the leading of the investigation. And should she have been the person leading the investigation? And then, the kind of questions that get raised is, Sebi's argument has been that the last natural person does not have to be disclosed anymore. So is that really true? The regulator has a lot of power of suasion. It doesn't all have to be on paper. Lots of times it's without saying anything. Hey, you want to do business in India? This is a serious issue. Start telling us names. This is how everybody operates. Even the police operate like that. And, we don't know whether any of that happened or were you just trying to stonewall it? Hindenburg is alleging that she tried to stonewall it. If she had made all the disclosures, we would have said, don't pay attention to Hindenburg. But because she hasn't made them, now you wonder whether there's any truth in it.
Let's come specifically to that question of recusal. You say in your article, it is clear that MPB, Madhabi Puri Buch, led the investigation into Hindenburg when the disclosures first happened in January 23. You say no disclosure of any recusal was made to the Supreme Court or to the expert committee. That clearly means that not only did she lead the investigation, but once again, she deliberately and consciously chose not to recuse herself. She didn't think it was necessary to do so. That is a huge order of bad judgment on her part, it would appear.
In fact, I'm making one more point. If she did make a recusal, which we don't know about, then obviously someone has told her it does not matter. Then this issue becomes even more serious, because then who told her that it does not matter, right? So
Absolutely.
It becomes far more serious if she had made a recusal. So one is actually, using the benefit of doubt and saying, apparently it was not made at all. But if she had recused herself and somebody, which means the Sebi board, because there are only two people she reports to, the Sebi board and the finance ministry. So if she had recused herself and it is a top secret and somebody told her that doesn't matter, you continue to lead the investigation, then that raises bigger questions.
Absolutely. And in that event, it's not just her judgment that was poor and at fault, but it was the judgment of the board or the Ministry of Finance that is also poor and at fault.
Absolutely.
So it becomes a bigger issue, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, there are also questions about the two consultancies set up by Madhabi Puri Buch and her husband Dhaval. Madhabi Buch, in a public statement, has said the two entities became dormant on her appointment with Sebi in 2017. However, Hindenburg has released documents showing that at least one of them was active and generating revenue. If I recall correctly, and I'm relying on my memory, it generated around $300,000 in 2022-2023. In this specific instance, is this confusion or is it contradiction or is it, let me use a tough word, deception?
Hard to say, because I would have imagined that statement would be run through a lawyer. And if you have a contradiction between point 11 and point 12, either someone has done a serious disservice to her, because I suppose it would have been run through a lawyer before they make it public, or they thought if they thought nobody would notice, then that is really scandalous, because Hindenburg had released documents. These are MCA documents. It's quite easy for anybody to access them. You have to pay a small fee to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and get them. In fact, these documents are not even such a secret. The Singapore documents, even Hindenburg couldn't access them, but the Indian documents are easily accessible. All kinds of documents of people which should not be in the public domain are bandied about. So this would have come out. And in fact, now it's even come out that the Indian companies shares an address with its statutory auditor.
Absolutely. If an error like this, and I'm using that word error on purpose, can be part of a statement issued by the chairperson of Sebi in her personal capacity, then that suggests that she has not only not been careful and thoughtful about what she's putting out, but she's had bad advice from lawyers, and there's a certain measure of carelessness.
It's really sad. It's careless, because this is such a small thing. You can't have it both ways. You can't say they're dormant, and you can't say they're active, and you can't say in the very next point that she says her husband has been using these consultancy companies. And that's another big question mark, because it's so easy to set up a consultancy company. If it is owned by your wife, 99% owned, and she has done something so path-breaking. She's the first woman heading Sebi. She's the first private sector person heading Sebi. You should have been a little more careful. Why do business through that company?
Let me pick up on that point. As you say, Madhabi Buch started his own consultancy practice through these very companies after he retired from Unilever. That's not illegal, but it is clearly, I imagine, improper or at least misleading, because it undermines the claim made by his wife that the consultancies were dormant. They weren't. Her husband was using them and generating profit and revenue through them.
In fact, this whole issue would have been inconsequential if there wasn't this misstatement in those 2 points. Because why did you claim they're dormant? You claim they're dormant because you thought it's good practice that you should not have those companies active, which is why you said they're dormant. And then you say your husband has been using them. And they are indeed active. The accounts are available till 2024. And you own 99% of the company.
So she's been tripped up by her own carelessness, to put it mildly.
I know. It's one of those sad things, right? I don't know whether it's sad or sloppy or bad advice, but it is. There it is.
Now, there's one other bizarre element to this story. Hindenburg has revealed a letter from Madhabi Buch asking for their joint accounts to be registered solely in his name. Yet the email registered with those accounts is Madhabi Buch's email, not his. Again, is this carelessness and forgetfulness, or are there grounds for suspicion?
Hard to say. If you look at Hindenburg's words carefully, they use the words ostensibly transferred, okay? Because he says they should now be registered in his name. So obviously Hindenburg, without saying it openly, by using the word ostensibly, is got a question mark over there. But anytime if the funds were transferred to the husband, it's just automatic that the email should have been changed. And anyone who is with a regulatory agency or a bank and who's used to compliance systems for a long time, for over 2 decades, ought to have known. So even if that company was sloppy and they had forgotten, then she probably should have said, hey guys, why are you sending these accounts to my email ID? It's been transferred to my husband. Why don't you change the email ID? This should have happened long before 2018. Instead, she sends that email from her account to ask for Dhaval's shares to be redeemed. That is, Sebi itself would have punished people if they had caught this. There would have been a small penalty at least for this kind of sloppiness.
So at the very least, I was going to say, at the very least, this is sloppy and careless, but it also does provide to those who wish to see it in that way grounds for suspicion. You begin to wonder, can someone who's reached the top as she has, path-breaking, as you put it, the first woman and the first private sector person to head the regulator, can she really be so sloppy and careless? Or is there something more?
And if it was just sloppiness, all the more reason why, what I said in the beginning, if the board had looked at it, They had heard her out. They had taken a call after an investigation on whether this was sloppiness, whether it was a big issue. Instead of it all spilling out like this in the public domain and trying to sort of stonewall it, all this would have been much clearer, right? So even today, there is a need for an investigation, because if the government takes the stand that, like in the sexual harassment case where the judge sits in judgment of his own case, you cannot have the capital market regulator doing this, because who sent out the press release? It can only be sanctioned by the Sebi chairperson, and you can't send out a press release about yourself.
Absolutely. That's a very good point you make.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Finally, let me end with what I imagine is your overall comment on the way Sebi has handled the Hindenburg affair since it became public knowledge way back in January 2023. You say, and I'm quoting you, it's a textbook example of how not to handle such a situation. To a layman like me, that's a pretty damning comment. Why do you say it?
Because it looks to me as though the finance ministry is tying up its own credibility and that of the organization with one individual. It's not about an individual, right? It is about the Indian capital market. It is about the capital market regulator. And to be seen as just stonewalling issues, starting to abuse the whistleblower and being party to it shows the government in very poor light.
Let me quote, before I end, something that you wrote about the way Sebi had responded to the Adani Group price shares going up before Hindenburg actually drew attention to it. You say, the manner in which India's market regulator, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, has gone about investigating the astounding rise in share prices of the Adani Group has been troubling for independent observers even before Hindenburg Research released its explosive report 18 months ago. I take it what you're saying is that Sebi did not do a good job investigating price ramping before Hindenburg.
And it goes back to the tenures of at least two chairpersons before her. And, people have been exchanging messages saying, do you know what's going on? Why does Sebi not look at it? Everyone has been talking about it, but we are in an environment in the last 10 years where people don't dare to say it openly. But it's not as though people don't know, that they have not been talking about and discussing it. In fact, I think it's the opposite. The investors in the market who are jumping to defend have all come only post 2020. Anyone who has seen the market for longer, for 10 years or 20 years, has been questioning the lack of investigation into these shares.
But now what we're talking about raises serious questions about the functioning of Sebi going back even before Madhabi Puri Buch took over as chairperson. And it also raises worrying questions about people who were her predecessors as chairperson. Both questions are being raised. No one may be doing so in public, but those who know the cognoscenti are aware of them, and that further undermines the system, because outside investors will be aware of these questions and they'll be saying to themselves, but no one's officially addressing them. So how clean is the system, they'll ask themselves.
And they will take advantage of it. They will have those same prominent lawyers defending them when they're in trouble, and you're never going to have serious market regulation at all.
So really, we have huge, big, sparkling questions about Sebi going back way beyond Madhabi Puri Buch took over.
Absolutely.
Should, and my last question is this one, Should Sebi have acted suo motu well before Madhabi Puri Buch took over, when these concerns were being voiced, even if they were being voiced behind closed doors? Should it have stepped in itself?
Karan, Sebi invests a lot of money in a software which flags every unusual rise in prices. And all of us have been saying, if you have that real-time software, how on earth has it not flagged anything? And they have been insisting that it hasn't. So yes, suo motu, because you have even invested in that software which red flags things. So if you have the remotest connections that are flagged over there and you catch people for insider trading, you have not noticed this runaway increase in Adani share prices, which created an opportunity for Hindenburg to short sell in the first place, or at least attempt to short sell.
So either the software doesn't work, in which case you wasted your money investing in it, or if it does work, you've deliberately chosen to give it a blind eye. You've given it the Nelson's eye, which doesn't stand anyone good.
Exactly. And a joint parliamentary committee or a standing committee of parliament on finance should have been asking these questions. If it worked, if they had the right people there, they should have been asking these questions.
You raised the issue, so let me ask that question. Do you think a JPC would be the right response at this time?
I've seen too many JPCs, and I think that becomes a political circus. But some kind of short, quick investigation is required to restore the credibility of the capital market regulator.
Sucheta Dalal, thank you very much for speaking to me, for explaining your article, and for expanding on your thoughts. I'm deeply grateful for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Pleasure, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.